Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Karen Sage. I use she, they, any pronouns, and if you hear a dog barking, I've got several. If you hear people talking, there are several people that live in my house, and I'm sorry. This is my end of year reading wrap up where I am going to take all of the books I read all year. I'm going to give them all one sentence reviews, and they're all going to be organized from the worst to the best book that I've read all year. The only caveats to that are I am not going to be including books that are not published yet because I do a lot of beta reading for my friend Alex Larkspur. I am also leaving out non-fiction because I don't rate that and it feels kind of weird to place it in the context of like a whole bunch of fiction. And I'm also leaving out rereads, so the same book is not going to get reviewed more than once. This is going to be kind of rapid fire, so I'm essentially just going to say the title of the book, the author of the book, and then give my one sentence review. And I was a little liberal in my definition of one sentence because I did definitely do run-on sentences here, but sometimes you just need more words. And also, if it sounds like it's two sentences, it's not. There's a semicolon in there. I promise. I wrote these out. I promise. Flock by Kate Stewart. An incredibly smutty why choose dark romance with a heroine who is rich and oblivious and you'll always be 5 steps ahead of, a bad boy with a heart of gold, love interest who sexually assaults the heroine and treats her like shit in front of other people, and a golden retriever love interest who treats the heroine like shit when people aren't around. No thanks. Caraval by Stephanie Garber. An instance where I really should have ignored the hype surrounding a series because it was filled with promising world building and stunted by mediocre style, bland and surface level characters, and a plot that maybe could have been interesting if it wasn't contradicting itself constantly in the name of mystery. Bitten by R.L. Stine. A formative YA vampire book for me that upon reread turned out to have incredibly flat characters, brief moments of horrifying descriptions, and an overall lackluster plot that left me questioning how Stine ever got popular in the first place. The Fury by Alex Michaelides. A classic perfect rich woman and all the people in her orbit thriller, meaning you're in for condescending and infuriating characters, incredibly obvious red herrings and plot twists, and a narrator who is the most annoying perspective I've read in years. Tales from a Not-So-Popular Life, Tales from a Not-So-Popular Party Girl, and Tales from a Not-So-Talented Pop Star by Rachel Renee Russell. Tying together the first 3 books from the Dork Diaries series, this nostalgia read was exactly what I wanted. Nostalgic, easy, and not too badly aged, all things considered. The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. A magical and vampiric story set in an interesting historical period with a unique and fascinating magic system that on paper probably should have been perfect for me, but it ended up really bland with forgettable characters and a romance that consisted of a man constantly talking about how bland the heroine looked. Bridge of Souls by V.E. Schwab, the final installment in the Cassidy Blake series that felt incredibly flat, almost because it felt like Schwab just wanted the series to end. Not that it had come to like a natural conclusion, which left most characters feeling partially developed and the plot of the finale being incredibly disappointing. On Strike Against God by Joanna Russ. A transitional historical piece of second to third wave feminism with beautiful and visceral writing, though the gender essentialism being a prominent undercurrent throughout the entire thing left me frustrated and uncomfortable. Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare. Classic Shakespeare play about taming a woman who wasn't interested in men in the first place, which left me dissatisfied and icked out by the final speech of the tamed woman. Frankenstein by Junji Ito. A fairly good but not great Ito collection, with the titular story dragging it down by not making a definitive choice between staying true to the source material or making it wholly Ito's own. Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. Touted as an enemies to lovers romance with characters that start off in love within the first 100 pages, this book left me dissatisfied and disbelieving of the romance, and in particular, the tension it kept trying to build, though the fantasy world and the plot was pretty interesting, honestly. Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross. An incredibly gorgeous and interesting fantasy world brought down by flat characters, which I've kind of come to expect from Rebecca Ross, and this book solidified her as a safe but not great author for me. Brigands and Bread Knives by Travis Baldree. A disappointing installment in the series which left me longing for connection with the main 3 characters, and finding absolutely none, which is honestly a feat considering how much I loved Fern in the prequel. The Prince and the Ice King by Amanda Mewison. A classically smutty guilty pleasure read, very loosely based on Beauty and the Beast, with interesting characters, dynamic relationships, and A genuinely very thrilling fantasy subplot. The Deal by Elle Kennedy. Another classically smutty guilty pleasure read as well, but this time it is college hockey romance with a heroine that is so 2016 not like other girls and a tortured bad boy hero. Tomb Sweeping by Alexandra Chang. A fairly well-balanced anthology of short stories about relationships with an undercurrent of horror running throughout. Rebel Witch by Kristen Ciccarelli. The second book in the Crimson Moth duology that left me bored with the relationship, where every sex scene felt forced. And I felt rushed when it came to the fantasy plot. And honestly, this could have easily been expanded into a third book. We Who Have No Gods by Liza Anderson. A fascinating fantasy world with demons at its center. An attention-filled romance that left me honestly disappointed in the maturity of the heroine and the believability of the romance by the end of it, but not the sexual tension. City of Ghosts and Tunnel of Bones by V.E. Schwab, grouping together the first and second books of the Cassidy Blake series, where the character development was consistent and the plot was genuinely riveting, though the main downside being just how much the main character talks about Harry Potter. Skeleton Creek by Patrick Carman, a nostalgia read that really holds its own, using a multimedia format to tell the mysterious story of the town of Skeleton Creek. Persuasion by Jane Austen. A classic in more ways than one Austen read, with a lot of visiting people's houses and polite conversations, while at the same time taking a look at the intricacies of love and the way that personal relationships can cloud your judgment of a person. Fresh Water by Akwaeke Emezi. An incredibly dark, fantastical fever dream of a book that focuses on a lot of serious and harrowing topics, which makes it a book that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anyone, but I do rate it highly. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. An interesting mystery on its own, though brought down by the racist controversy surrounding the original title and the general anti-Semitism throughout. Venus in the Blind Spot by Junji Ito. A very good and very representative collection of short stories by Junji Ito, with the title story being one of my favorite Ito stories of all time. Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Wang. Another fever dream of a book that takes a look at the horror of beauty standards and what that means in the context of being a person of color, with simply so many horrifying descriptions that leave visuals in my brain to this day. The God of Lost Words by A.J. Hackwith. A perfect culmination to a story about stories and what makes a person, with compelling and lovable characters and a plot that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Only dampened by my personal experience with the audiobook. A Winter's Promise by Christelle Davos. An incredibly intense political intrigue book that is massively hindered by the fact that it's touted as a romance, rather than the political fantasy book that it is, with complex and fascinating characters that keep you on the edge of your seat. The Mysterious Study of Dr. Sex by Tamsin Muir. An interesting look at two side characters of the Locked Tomb series, Camilla and Palamides, specifically in their childhood, with a healthy dose of the Sixth House world building, all bolstered by the fact that it is, of course, part of a 5-star series. Stitches by Amanda Muessa. The smuttiest book that was ever written explicitly for me, with monster-like characters that held my interest, and an incredibly tender relationship focused around what it really means to be a person, all with the intense and frankly horrifying fantasy plot surrounding it all. And also monster fucking. Animal Farm by George Orwell. A short and not so sweet read about capitalism, which I honestly think I would have had a more enjoyable time with if I had read it when I was much younger and before I read 1984. As it's a good introduction to Orwell, but maybe not one of the most revolutionary and mind-altering works for me at this point in time. Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. A long-awaited installment about Hamish's games that felt a little heavy-handed on the symbolism, and also a little heavy-handed on the cameos. Although I did love it all the same, and it was everything I could have wished for. Paladin's Hope by T. Kingfisher. A highly anticipated romance between Galen and Piper that honestly left me a little bit disappointed with the romance development, even if I really did enjoy the fantasy plot of it all. The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. An absolutely fascinating magic system surrounding demons and the school where people go to learn magic, with a thrilling fantasy plot, although I found myself disappointed by the romance and the character development of the main character. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. An incredible magic system and fantasy world that kept its dreamlike quality the entire time, with with a cute romance and a lot of tension from the dangers that lurk in the sky and on land. Paladin's Strength by T. Kingfisher. A very sweet romance between Clara and Istvan that focuses around their two mysteries that need to be solved, all while they accidentally fall in love with so much delicious sexual tension and fantasy world development galore. Dolores Claiborne by Stephen King. A really interesting mystery thriller told from the perspective of a woman who's been implicated in 2 deaths, with no chapters being told entirely in dialect and asides, as though the woman, Dolores, is just sitting there telling you the story of her life. A Taste of Wild Honey by Alex Larkspur. A simple, smutty short story about the beloved characters of Sweet and Wild. Not too much to say about it. Take Two by Sienna Mercer. A genuinely very good installment to the My Sister the Vampire series that does exactly what it says on the tin. Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. A really solid romantasy book that knows what it means to be an enemies to lovers. That had interesting characters, but a problem with sticking the landing on plot twists, while also being predictable with not really enough payoff. Sweet and Wild by Alex Larkspur. Not necessarily a cozy story, although it is often a cozy fantasy, as there's an undercurrent of darkness running throughout and incredibly hard-hitting and violent scenes. Though it does have a lovable cottagecore main character in the form of Micah, and a fantastical love interest in the form of the forest spirit Taryn, all while Micah is going through the process of learning how to fit into a new town. Forgive Me Not by Mari Costa, an incredibly sweet graphic novel that answers the questions of what happens to the baby that gets swapped out by a changeling, and also what happens to the changeling that gets swapped out for a baby, with the answer, they fall in love. And also there's a lot of scary fantasy stuff happening in the background. In the Weeds by B.K. Borison, the second book in the Lovelight series that focuses on Beckett, our gruff farmer of Lovelight, and Evelyn, the woman who saved Lovelight through the power of social media, which has incredibly steamy sex scenes, incredibly tender romance scenes, but unfortunately also has a third act conflict that didn't really work for me. Mixed Signals by B.K. Borison, the third book in the Lovelight series that focuses on Caleb Alvarez, the former police officer, now Spanish teacher, and Layla Dupree, the baker at Lovelight, as they both struggle to figure out what it is that makes them have such a hard time dating. So they decide their best solution is to do a practice run dating each other for a month, which results in a lot of steamy sex scenes and incredibly tender romance scenes, and a lot of really good character development for both of these characters. Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, an incredible fantasy world surrounding the importance of stories, with incredibly fascinating characters that kept making such interesting decisions, and a dangerous plot to keep stories safe by locking them away. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, the most classic of all classic Austens, with family drama and scandals galore, and the perfectly imperfect Mr. Darcy himself. And though I really do love the movie, and it is definitely my favorite of the two, this book is also very good. Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh, a book best described as ethereal that kind of left me floating in the ether of a forest, all while I'm being told the romance story of 2 very different men, one who is inexplicably tied to a forest, and the other who is trying to figure out the story surrounding the forest. First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. Somehow Borison even makes the jealous, moody hero look good in the form of Aidan Valentine, who falls in love with Lucy Stone, a co-parenting mother whose daughter is seriously concerned with her love life, and this book is a classic Borison with steamy sex scenes. Very good character development, very tender romance scenes, and a third act conflict that doesn't really work for me, but the rest of the book is too good to deny. The River Has Roots by Amal El Motar, a written in modern day fairy tale about the power of sisterhood, the importance of song and language, and a romance that lasts even across the borders of the Fey Line. Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, a book full of nostalgic energy despite being brand new to me, with a huge and vivid cast of characters, an incredibly interesting magic system, a world full of wonders, and also whales. Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher, the first book in the Saint of Steel series, which focuses on Stephen, a paladin who is seriously tortured, and Grace, a perfumer who is running from her past. And their romance is so incredibly sweet. I'm a little bit obsessed with them. And their sex scenes are so funny and so steamy. And I'm a little bit obsessed with them. Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. The second book in the Strange the Dreamer duology that was packed with so much more world building than I was expecting, that only built on the interesting character relationships that we saw in the last book, while also keeping the tension incredibly high for the entire thing, and a beautiful contrast of hatred and love and the line between them. Paladin's Faith by T. Kingfisher. The most recent release in the Saint of Steel series, focusing on Marguerite, a spy who is running from a former employer, and Shane, a paladin tasked with keeping her alive as they walk the line of political intrigue, incredibly delicious sexual tension, and they ultimately fall in love. And those are all the books that I read in 2025. Kind of. You heard my caveats. I hope you enjoyed listening to me do a lot of run-on sentences and talk about all the books that I read. I've got to go put all those books back now, which is kind of a problem. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you next time.